So, what to say about Turbo? It certainly remains one of the more contentious albums in the Judas Priest discography, right up there with Nostradamus. But how do I feel about this record now, all of these years later? Well, stick around and let's find out. So my personal history of this album goes back to 1986 when this record came out. I was eagerly awaiting the follow-up to 1984's Defenders of the Faith, which is my favorite Judas Priest album. I was a teenager at the time, of course. I was 17 years old when this came out, and I had some expectations, some rather inflexible teenager metalhead expectations. I kind of wanted Defenders Part 2 in a lot of ways. And did I get that? Not at all. So yes, Turbo wasn't the direct musical successor to Defenders of the Faith. It's a bit of a pop rock album, to be honest. There's a lot of synthesized guitars here and other commercial elements of the time. Also, their tour outfits, also seen in the music videos, kind of a Chess King interpretation of biker wear, for those who remember Chess King. To be fair, Judas Priest was definitely in a long list of bands in the mid-1980s who decided to put out safe and over-polished albums. Think Raven, Ozzy, Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, all did that in the mid-1980s. Maybe it was due to label pressure or to just keep up with the times or as a cash grab. But this album is definitely in that camp. As for how I felt about this album back then, I was somewhat disappointed in it, but I liked a few of the tracks. And I think those tracks that I liked were largely a product of the fact that I had this big crush on this older woman. We saw each other for a few months. She was in love with this record, so she played it a ton, and I think some of those songs seeped in, but I think my feelings for her were mixed in there too. When that ended, those feelings ended. And I was also getting into extreme metal in 1986, 87, 88, so this album really got cast by the wayside and ended up really not liking it at all. Pretty much hating it. So that's where I am, and it looks like I'm going to give this album a spin. All of these years, decades later? Sure, we'll call it that. Anyways, I'll be right back with the track by track. So with the synth intro as well as the synth guitars, I think we all know we're going in a pop rock direction right away with this track. I think the chorus is really, really catchy. In fact, many of the choruses are, not in small part to Rob Halford's powerful vocal delivery here and elsewhere. Sometimes that vocal delivery saves a track, sometimes it does not. We're going to find that out later, of course. One thing, of course, that I'm reminded of while I hear this song and others is that, and I guess this is going to show a bias, is that, you know, if you just produce this album like Defenders or Screaming for Vengeance, and I don't mean make a carbon copy of them, but the production, take the synths out, heavy the tracks up, I think some of these songs are quite savable in that regard. I think they would be great heavy metal songs. This is one of them, I believe, but it's not to be. But, you know, despite its synth leanings, I'm actually pretty good with this track, so I'm going to say I like it. Yeah. Next up with track 2, we've got more synth guitars. We also have a much stronger chorus than the rest of the song. I think more so in this track than in Turbo Lover. It's also a bit dancey and swingy. It's kind of strange. Also in the chorus, we've got what sounds like Motown girl group in the back. A little bit of R&B. I don't know why that's there. It's totally unneeded. It definitely makes it less and less a Judas Priest song in a lot of ways. Again, experimenting. It's the mid-'80s, but it just doesn't work. It's just too lightweight of a track for Priest. It really is. And we're going to get a couple more of those, of course. Despite that, I think it's okay. I don't love it. I don't hate it. It's kind of in the middle. So track 3 leads with an obnoxious synth intro. Thankfully, it's short, which is an odd thing to say. It's like, gee, thank God this part is less painful than the other painful parts of the song. I guess I'm going to put it that way. This is also when the really bad lyrics come in. I mean, really bad, even for Judas Priest, who are not really strong in the lyrical department more often than not. Painkiller excluded. I think there's some other great lyrical songs from them, but this is really not one of them. A lot of bands do suffer from this from time to time. Admittedly, Kiss is one of those bands. I mean, they're my favorite band, but they've written some really dumb lyrics. And this is one of those songs from Judas Priest where the lyrics are cringy, to put it mildly. I really don't think heavying this particular song up would really work. Also, there's some interesting elements. There are whooshes and hand claps. I mean, like hand claps. That's a pop synth thing, and usually from a few years back. So I don't know why they're there. Yeah, the track is too simple, it's too sugar-coated, it's too weak. It's definitely one to skip. And going from one weak track to another weak track, actually an even weaker track, here is track 4. The vocal melody is really kid stuff. It's really oversimplistic and poppy and unsatisfying, to put it mildly. The chorus in this song is even lamer than the chorus in the last song. And again, dumb lyrics again. I think this is a part 1, part 2 thing with these 2 tracks. Yeah, totally skippable. Yeah. This almost sounds like it could have been a Night Ranger song if that band chose to get anthemic. I mean, it's upbeat and peppy, but definitely not metal. If you're expecting metal here, you may as well just let that go. And of course, at the end of the track, there's sort of ham-handed referencing to their song, You've Got Another Thing Coming. It's kind of weak, kind of lame. Yeah, skip this one. Ending side 1 is track 5. Pretty great lead-in riff. Picks up the pace quite a bit. The chorus is a bit weak. It's okay, but it's not really strong. The solo is pretty great. And of course, they lay off on the guitar synth, making this sound like a much more Judas Priest song. Thankfully. I am of 2 minds about the breakdown segment. Really not into it. I think better production might have picked it up a little bit, but overall I'm just not into it. So this track's a bit repetitive at times, but I think the guitar work saves it quite a bit, so it's decent. So opening side 2 is track 6. We've got a bit of a power ballad of sorts, interesting synth intro. I'm not going to bust on this intro as much as the others. I think it has a sort of strange and subtle allusion to Love Bites from Defenders of the Faith. I think that might be a little bit intentional considering both tracks are track 1, side 2, just in their placement, so that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to say it, there is some decent songwriting here, though maybe the execution does drag it down a little bit. Halford can pull off these sort of de facto power ballads. I think he did a better job on Night Comes Down from Defenders of the Faith. Going to make that comparison again, of course. I think the solos in this song would have been better if they hadn't been muddied by the synth effect. I think they're good solos. I just think they're encumbered by bad effects. So if they had taken those away, it would have been better. So despite the gripes I just mentioned, I really do think this is a strong track, despite its synth leanings. Is it as Priest as I would like? Probably not, but I think it stands on its own. So track 7, right out the gate, stupid song title. I mean, it's awful. This song also has a bit of dalliance into pop metal, definitely more synth in this song. I'm surprised this wasn't a pop single. I mean, they could have pushed it as such if they were going that direction, and it seems like they were flirting with it anyways. It's not one of the 3 singles from Turbo, but yeah, pop. That's what this is. It's a pop song. Lyrics on this one are especially mindless, but again, Judas Priest, not the best lyricist in the world consistently. Painkiller aside, again, some of the riffs and soloing are definitely sort of glam metal bluesy. I don't know if I want that in my Judas Priest. Maybe you do, but it just doesn't really fit. So yeah, half and half with this. Probably leaning towards not liking it much at all. So track 8, apparently we needed 2 songs back to back with the word hot in them. I'm not sure why. I like the lead riff, but it does lead into a really unsatisfying verse riff. I mean, you got this promise at the beginning of the track, and then you're led into meh, basically. So a very poppy track here, probably one of the poppiest on the album. It's funny, if you took out Rob Halford's vocals, you might not even know this is a Judas Priest song. You wouldn't even recognize it as such. Despite the soloing, which is actually serviceable, not amazing, but decent. So worst song on side 2, hands down. So ending the album with track 9, classic Judas Priest riffage opens the song. Truth be known, this is my favorite track on the album, hands down. It has that heaviness that we've come to expect from the band. Just a great song. Also a really strong album closer. In fact, I kind of wonder, why wasn't there more material like Reckless on this album? Why? Of course, as some people know, this song almost ended up in the movie Top Gun, but the band declined because they thought the movie would be a flop. That's pretty incredible. So yeah, strong track. Definitely dig it a lot. So here are the point totals, 50%, makes sense. Also, I should say that, and I said this before, I'm going to say it again, if Turbo had basically been treated like Defenders or Screaming in terms of production, but also instrumentation, I think it would have been a better album. I think it would have been a heavier album. I think it would have been more of a Judas Priest album, to be honest, but wasn't meant to be. And by that, I don't mean that this should have been Defenders Part 2, but I don't think it also needed to be a synth rock pop album either. You know, maybe record execs pushed them into this direction, maybe they were following current trends, maybe it was a combination of the two, maybe they just wanted more money, who knows? But this is the album we got, and yeah, you know, half and half, again. Much might have been the reason why the next album, Ram It Down, seemed to return in part to some of their heavier music. I think Ram It Down has one foot in Defenders and one foot in Turbo. Of course, they would go further back into metal when they put out Painkiller, an amazing album, probably one of their best. But maybe some lessons were learned on this album. We should also talk about Turbo's artwork. It's done by Canadian graphic artist Doug Johnson. He also did the previous two albums, Defenders of the Faith and Screaming for Vengeance. But the big difference here is that those previous two albums, had more mechanized beasts as an illustration, much more heavy metal. Turbo is a little more ambiguous in that regard. It's more glossy, it's less metal, let's be honest. And I don't think that's necessarily an accident. Johnson did the artwork for Cosmic Candy, for those who remember that packaging back in the later 70s and the early 80s. And that's illustration for Candy. And if you look at Turbo, it looks like candy. It looks like a sugar pop coated candy thing. So maybe a little bit of truth in packaging. Maybe they went for this graphic because it was softer and safer. I don't know. Seems about right. So I'm not really surprised by the point totals here. I am surprised that I liked Out in the Cold all of these years later. Didn't think that would happen. Also, the track Restless, I do like it quite a bit more than I liked it back then. I mean, I liked it then, but I really like it now. So that's pretty amazing. Also, things I didn't notice back then that I notice now by listening to the album more critically. The hand claps in Private Property come to mind. How did I not catch those? Ridiculous. So yeah, the album's half and half for me. I disliked half of it, and I either liked or loved the rest of it. So yeah, mixed bag. And that's my revisit of Turbo by Judas Priest. But what do you think about this album? Do you like it? Do you hate it? And if you do hate it, would you revisit it all these years later? Let me know all that and anything else that makes sense in the comments below. And you know, maybe you're saying to yourself, hey Matt, how can I support the Accusation Network? Well, 3 ways to do it. Like, subscribe, and share. Definitely do those 3 things, and everything will be amazing. Also, you'll be helping me out a little bit too, so there you go. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.